What happens when Jimin and BTS arrive in Chicago just hours before one of the biggest concerts of their 2026 tour, and ARMY realize they are finally in the same city? The answer? O'Hare turns into a sea of excitement. Phones rise. Voices echo. Fans desperately try to catch a glimpse of Jimin. And suddenly, the airport is no longer just an airport. Because BTS is in Chicago. And Jimin is at the center of the attention. The countdown is almost over. On August 27th and 28th, BTS is scheduled to take the stage at Soldier Field in Chicago at 8 p.m. both nights. The official Soldier Field listing confirms the two-night Chicago stop of the BTS World Tour. But before thousands of ARMY enter that stadium, before the lights go dark, before the first beat shakes Soldier Field, there was the arrival. And for Jimin, that arrival carries an emotional weight that is difficult to explain. Because think about the scene. Chicago is moving at its normal pace. Planes are arriving. Passengers are rushing toward baggage claim. Suitcases roll across the floor. Announcements echo through the terminal. People are checking their phones, looking at departure boards, searching for their gates. Everything seems completely ordinary. Until one name begins moving through the crowd. Jimin. At first, it is only a whisper. Then another fan hears it. Then another. Someone looks up. Someone raises a phone. Someone suddenly realizes what might be happening. And within moments, the atmosphere changes. That is the extraordinary thing about BTS. They can enter a city without performing a single note and still create the energy of a concert. And Jimin? Jimin has a way of making that reaction even more emotional. Because his public presence often carries an interesting contrast. He can appear calm, reserved, gentle, almost completely composed. But around him, the energy can be enormous. That contrast is exactly what makes his arrival so fascinating. One person moving forward quietly, while hundreds or thousands of emotions explode around him. And just imagine being one of the ARMY standing there. You have waited. You have traveled. You have watched the countdown. You have followed every update. And then, suddenly, you realize that Jimin is no longer somewhere far away. He is in Chicago. The city where you are standing. The city where BTS will perform. The city where, in less than a day, Jimin will stand under the lights at Soldier Field. Would you scream? Would you cry? Would you freeze? Or would you simply stare because your brain couldn't process the moment quickly enough? That is the emotional power of an arrival like this. And there is another reason why this particular moment feels different. The concert isn't weeks away. It isn't months away. It is almost here. The official schedule places BTS at Soldier Field on Thursday, August 27th, and Friday, August 28th, with both concerts beginning at 8 p.m. So when Jimin arrives in Chicago, ARMY aren't looking at a distant future anymore. They are looking at tomorrow. Tomorrow, the lights will go down. Tomorrow, thousands of light sticks will rise. Tomorrow, the stadium will roar. Tomorrow, Jimin will be standing on that stage. And that realization makes every second of his arrival feel bigger. Because the airport is only the opening scene. The real story is waiting at Soldier Field. But before we get there, let's stay with Jimin for a moment. Imagine the sound. Fans calling his name. Phones recording. People trying to get a better view. The unmistakable excitement that follows BTS wherever they go. And somewhere inside that noise, Jimin continues moving forward. Perhaps he is focused on getting to the next destination. Perhaps he is thinking about the concert. Perhaps he is simply taking in the moment. We can't know exactly what is going through his mind unless he tells us. And that uncertainty is part of what makes the moment so compelling. Because while ARMY can see the excitement around him, they cannot see everything happening inside his world. Maybe he's tired after traveling. Maybe he's excited to finally reach Chicago. Maybe he's already thinking about the stage. Maybe he's wondering what Chicago ARMY will sound like tomorrow night. And that last possibility is especially interesting. Because if you've ever seen a BTS stadium concert, you know that the audience isn't just background noise. The audience becomes part of the performance. Every scream changes the atmosphere. Every chant adds energy. Every light becomes part of the visual landscape. And Jimin knows exactly how powerful that connection can be. That's why the airport reaction matters. It's the first signal. The first message from Chicago. We're here. We're waiting for you. And if Jimin could hear the collective excitement around him, imagine what that might feel like after such a long journey. The city isn't simply welcoming BTS. ARMY are welcoming Jimin. And there is something deeply personal about that. Because for many fans, Jimin isn't simply a performer. His music, his personality, his words, and his presence may have become part of their lives. Maybe someone discovered BTS during a difficult period. Maybe someone found comfort in a song. Maybe someone made their closest friends through the fandom. Maybe someone dreamed for years of seeing Jimin perform live. And now, he has arrived. That's why some fans don't react with words. They react with tears. Because sometimes excitement becomes too large for language. You can prepare a sentence. You can prepare a banner. You can prepare the perfect greeting. But when the person you've watched for years suddenly appears in front of you, everything disappears. You simply feel. And that is where the airport scene becomes much more than celebrity excitement. It becomes a moment of connection. But there is another question hanging over this entire arrival. What will happen when Jimin sees the Chicago crowd tomorrow? Because the airport is one thing. Soldier Field is another universe. The official venue describes these Chicago shows as part of BTS's massive 2026 to 2027 World Tour, marking the group's return to the global stage as a full group. And that matters. Because for ARMY, seeing BTS together again on a giant stage carries enormous emotional significance. But for Jimin specifically, there is another layer. He has spent years developing a performance identity that can shift in seconds. Soft and intimate one moment. Explosive the next. A quiet expression can suddenly become a powerful performance. A small gesture can send an entire stadium into chaos. And Chicago is about to experience that firsthand. But first, the waiting. The hours between arrival and concert can sometimes feel longer than the entire journey. ARMY are already thinking about tomorrow. What will the opening look like? What songs will be performed? What will Jimin wear? Will he change his hairstyle? Will he say something special to Chicago? Will he notice the banners? Will he interact with the audience? Will there be an unexpected moment that nobody sees coming? Nobody knows. And that's exactly why anticipation is so powerful. Every possibility remains open. Every minute feels important. And somewhere in Chicago, the stage is waiting. Imagine Soldier Field after sunset. The sky becoming darker. The city lights becoming brighter. The lakefront air moving through the area. Fans beginning to gather. Purple lights appearing one by one. A sea of ARMY bombs slowly forming. People checking their tickets. Friends taking pictures. Fans who traveled hundreds or even thousands of miles standing beside people they met for the first time. And then someone says, "They're really here." That's the sentence that changes everything. Because suddenly, the airport arrival becomes real. The concert becomes real. Jimin becomes real. Tomorrow becomes now. And the closer the concert gets, the more intense the emotion becomes. But let's go back to O'Hare. Because there is something almost poetic about BTS arriving through an airport before taking over a stadium. The airport represents movement, departure, arrival, transition. The stadium represents destination, performance, connection. And Jimin is standing right in the middle of that transition. He has arrived. But the biggest moment hasn't happened yet. That's the open loop. The airport may have erupted. But what happens when Jimin walks onto the Soldier Field stage? That's when everything changes. Because airport noise is unpredictable. A concert roar is something else entirely. Thousands of people will be inside one place, waiting for one moment. The lights go dark. The screen changes. The opening sequence begins. And suddenly, the entire stadium becomes silent for a fraction of a second. That tiny silence is important. Because everyone knows what comes next. Then, the sound hits. The crowd explodes. And 7 figures appear. BTS. But among those 7 silhouettes, there is one person thousands of fans have been waiting to see. Jimin. Imagine that first shot. The lights catching his silhouette. The camera moving closer. The crowd recognizing him. The scream becoming louder. And Jimin looking out across the stadium. For a performer, that moment can be overwhelming. Because from the stage, the crowd doesn't look like individual people anymore. It looks like an ocean. Thousands of faces. Thousands of lights. Thousands of voices. And then one thought becomes impossible to ignore. They came for us. They came for BTS. They came for Jimin. They waited. They traveled. They prepared. And now they're standing together. That's the emotional payoff behind all the airport excitement. The airport was the greeting. The stadium is the answer. But there is still one more question. What will Jimin remember from Chicago? Will it be the screaming? The stage? The songs? The lights? The fans? Maybe all of it. But sometimes the smallest moments become the memories that stay longest. A fan holding a handwritten sign. Someone crying during a song. A child seeing BTS for the first time. A group of friends hugging when the opening begins. A fan screaming Jimin's name until their voice disappears. Those moments don't appear in official statistics. They don't show up in ticket numbers. But they are part of the real story. Because BTS concerts aren't simply about the artists on stage. They are about everyone who made the journey to get there. And Jimin has often been at the center of that emotional connection. Not because he demands attention, but because fans naturally give it. There is something about his presence that creates a unique response. Maybe it's his voice. Maybe it's his dancing. Maybe it's his expression. Maybe it's the combination of confidence and vulnerability he brings to a performance. Or maybe it's simply Jimin being Jimin. And Chicago is about to find out what that feels like in person. The official event listings confirm that both Chicago concerts are scheduled for 8 p.m., with the venue opening its doors at 6 p.m. So the countdown is now brutally simple. 2 nights. 1 stadium. 7 members. 1 enormous crowd. And 1 Jimin moment that could become unforgettable. But before the stage, there is tonight. The city is quieting down. Fans are preparing. Outfits are being chosen. Banners are being finished. Phones are charging. Tickets are being checked again and again. And somewhere, Jimin is preparing for tomorrow. Maybe there is a rehearsal. Maybe there are meetings. Maybe there is simply a quiet moment before the storm. And that contrast is beautiful. Outside, ARMY are exploding with excitement. Inside, the artist must somehow find focus. That's the life of a performer. The world is screaming your name. But you still have to breathe. You still have to concentrate. You still have to step onto that stage and give everything you have. And that's why seeing Jimin arrive can feel surprisingly emotional. Behind the superstar is a person. A person who has traveled. A person who may be tired. A person who knows that tomorrow thousands of people will expect him to perform at his absolute best. And yet, he keeps moving forward. That's what makes the moment powerful. The airport may be chaotic, but the destination requires control. The crowd may be screaming, but the performer must remain focused. Excitement and responsibility collide. And tomorrow night, that collision will become music. Now picture the final seconds before the concert begins. The stadium lights dim. The conversations stop. The screens glow. The crowd begins chanting. Someone starts screaming Jimin's name. Then another section joins. Then another. Until the sound travels across the stadium. And Jimin hears it. For one brief moment, everything else disappears. No airport. No travel. No schedule. No countdown. Just Jimin. And Chicago Army. That is the moment this entire story has been building toward. Because the real meaning of the O'Hare arrival isn't that BTS has entered Chicago. It's that the distance between artist and audience has become smaller. The group has traveled all the way to this city. And the fans have traveled just as far emotionally to meet them here. That's why an airport can become part of a concert story. Because the concert doesn't really begin when the first song starts. It begins the moment BTS arrives. It begins when fans realize they're here. And from that point on, every second becomes part of the experience. The first sighting. The first scream. The first photo. The first wave. The first time Jimin steps into Chicago. And then, finally, the first note at Soldier Field. The official schedule makes the next chapter very clear. BTS is set for 2 Chicago performances, August 27th and August 28th, before moving on to Los Angeles in early September. So Chicago has only a short window. 2 nights. 2 opportunities. 2 unforgettable chances. And ARMY know that. That's why the excitement feels almost impossible to contain. Because when the second show ends, the chapter closes. The lights come back on. The crowd begins leaving. The stadium becomes quiet again. But the memories remain. And perhaps years from now, someone will still remember standing at O'Hare. They'll remember the sound. The crowd. The phones. The moment they realized Jimin was there. Maybe they captured a photo. Maybe they didn't. Maybe Jimin looked in their direction. Maybe he didn't. But they'll remember how they felt. And honestly, isn't that what these moments are really about? Not perfect footage. Not perfect pictures. Not proving that you were there. But feeling something so deeply that the memory stays with you. That's why Jimin's arrival in Chicago matters. Because behind every scream is a story. Behind every phone is a memory. Behind every ARMY is a reason. And behind the superstar walking through the airport is someone who is about to step onto a stage in front of thousands of people who have been waiting for him. So tonight, Chicago is holding its breath. O'Hare has already delivered the first wave of excitement. But Soldier Field is waiting. The stage is ready. The lights are ready. ARMY are ready. And Jimin? He's finally here. Tomorrow, the airport noise will be replaced by stadium thunder. The whispers will become chants. The phone screens will become a sea of purple. And that quiet moment of arrival will transform into something much bigger. A concert.